I'm going to be talking to you about pruning ever-bearing, or also called fall-bearing, raspberries. I'm also going to be talking to you about some general information about raspberries and their growth patterns, which will help you understand the mystery of pruning ever-bearing raspberries. So first of all, I want to this is a raspberry patch, and I believe that it's the heritage variety of raspberries. The reason I don't know is this patch has been here at least 25 years. So raspberries are a great crop because they, once planted and really established, they can last a really long time. I'm going to talk to you about some general principles about raspberries. One thing to know is that raspberry roots are perennial, but the canes are biennial. And that means basically any cane lives for 2 years and then it dies. It's dead. You can't get any more production from it. So all raspberries, summer-bearing and fall-bearing, or they're called summer-bearing and ever-bearing, which is another name for the fall-bearing, are the same thing, and that the canes will live for 2 years and then they die. The difference between the summer-bearing and the fall-bearing is that the summer-bearing cane begins as a very small green sprout from the ground. It grows for a year to a certain height, which will vary depending on the raspberry. And then it will not fruit that very first year of that particular cane. The leaves will die back off of the cane in the winter, and then the second year that summer-bearing raspberry will fruit on what is called the second year cane. So the terms for the first year cane is, you'll hear this, is a primocane, and the second year cane is a Flora cane. Somewhere along the line, we've developed raspberries which are called fall-bearing. Fall-bearing means that they are exceptional in that the primocane, the first year's growth, will produce raspberries at the tip of the raspberry cane the very first year. That first year raspberry cane is called a primocane. So fall-bearing raspberries will produce on a particular cane the first year. Once that raspberry has fruited on the tip in the fall, it can be pruned back below where it fruited, which is what I've done with some of these canes. You can see these have been pruned back from this height. And this cane then will overwinter, and in June or July it will produce raspberry branches, in essence, and it will produce a crop of raspberries in June or July. So in ever-bearing raspberries, you've always got a combination of raspberries that are fruiting from branches and then in June or July, and then you have canes that are their first year that are fruiting on the top. In the pruning process, it's easy to know when a cane is ready to be totally pruned out to the ground because it looks like this one. I call them ghost canes. They turn dried and kind of gray on the outside, and they're dead on the inside. So anytime you have a dead cane, you cut it out at the ground. Okay? That's pretty simple. Then the second step in the pruning is that you'll be pruning all the canes that were the first year cane. You'll be pruning them back to below where they fruited. Okay? So what you'll be left with in an ever-bearing bed is the canes that fruited this year, pruned down to below where they fruited, And then you want to space them out so that you have enough space, and anything that's particularly spindly, you just get rid of those. So you want some healthy, say, 1/4-inch canes dispersed through the bed with enough space, because most of these raspberries have not started their the New Year's growth, but from the base of these canes there will be little green sprouts in about a couple weeks, and there are a couple of them in the bed, which we can share some photos of later. Those will grow this much in 1 year. So let me say something about the height of the raspberries, which can be disconcerting when you plant raspberries, because these raspberries, as I said, are 25 years old. So just like a tree, they have roots that are deeply established in the ground, enough to support fairly robust canes and robust growth. So when you get raspberries the first year, you may not get this kind of height. And depending on the variety that you pick, and there are a tremendous variety of raspberries, you will get different heights of the raspberries. I'm just going to demonstrate for a couple minutes here the pruning of the primocane, the first year growth, which fruited on the tip in September. You can see that this part fruited, it died. This actually has a little vestige of some fruit here, so I'm going to prune below that. And it doesn't really matter whether you go down 1, 2, or even farther. So I'm just going to prune that off right above the bud. These buds will branch out next year, so I'm just going to take that off. So here's another one. You can see the same thing. You can see the last year's. There's a dead raspberry, and we're going to go down a couple of the nodes and prune right above that in a diagonal cut. Done. Okay, here's another one. Same thing. We're going to go ahead, go below where it fruited, and prune those off. Those will branch out next year. So generally, I prune out the dead Flora canes, the dead second year branching first, because it makes it easier, because you can kind of look up from something that's like this. You can look up from the base and see that it's branched out and it's dead here. For example, here's a good one. So you can see this one has branched out, it's dead, and you can, if you prune all of these out first and prune what were the primocanes out last, it's a little easier to see, because sometimes you have to track them up from the bottom. So these fruited, dead now floricanes, you just go down, you track them down to the base, and then you pull these out of the bed. And then you have last year's cane, which you cut off at the base near the crown of the plant. We have wires around this bed to support the canes, because when they get really, really tall, they tend to, and are weighted with fruit, they lean over. We're going to go ahead for the actual pruning experience with the group that we have here. We're going to take those wires off, because it's just easier to get the canes out of the bed. There are a lot of different ways to support trellis. Raspberries and different raspberries varieties need different, might benefit by different kind of trellising. Again, these are fairly erect, heavy canes, largely self-supporting, but there are many canes that might be softer, or if you were only having growing them for the fall crop, you would have canes that might need a little bit more support. And there's a lot of good trellises and designs for support online. Okay, so a couple other things. This is January, late January, and you can see that some of these raspberries here in Sebastopol, California, still have little bits of raspberry on them. But in general, you're wanting to prune the raspberries when they're as dormant as they can be. I've seen some things where they talk about pruning after the berries have fruited, but the other material I've read said, you know, wait, because really the life needs to kind of go back into the roots and feed the roots. So you want to leave the leaves on, and you want to really not prune until they've gone somewhat dormant. So our raspberries are quite robust at this point and tall. And people have asked why. And one of the things that, as I said, we've had this patch for about 25 years. When we started, I think we hand watered. And the raspberries were not this tall. And we have a sort of a sandy loam soil that was not particularly enriched. It was really the drought and my anxiety around the drought that caused these raspberries to grow tall. And the reason is that at that point, I began to put on tremendous amounts of compost on the raspberries and a lot of mulch. And it was compost that we actually make here, and it was generally the mulch I used was leaf mulch. The other thing that we did was we put in an irrigation system. We use a soaker hose, which is not usually recommended. They don't last that long, but what I have found is that the raspberry roots are pretty shallow rooted, and so the soaker hose provides a good even spread for the raspberries. So the combination of the water and the compost and the mulch over time has really made these very hardy, robust plants. So it really depends on what your soil is, but in general, raspberries, if you think about them, they're from the bramble family. They grow in generally riparian areas or sort of on the edge of forest. They need good drainage. Their roots cannot sit in water, can't be wet, but they need a fair amount of nutrients. And the compost and the mulch combined seems to do well by these. So they've established them. So I think getting your raspberries established means being patient over a period of time and continuing to compost them and feed them. But they are perennials, so they will last a long time. I don't know how long these will last, but these are at least 25 years old. When you go to pick raspberries at the nursery, the first thing you want to know is whether they are summer bearing or what's called fall bearing or ever bearing. And that's important to know because that will tell you, one, if they're summer bearing, you'll get one crop, and you need to let each cane grow for the 2 years. If you choose the fall bearing, you can have a choice for only having a single crop in the fall. So I could just take this cane and cut it out. It's still alive, it will produce next year. But an option would be to cut it out and just have fruit in the fall. Because we're a little bit greedy and the plants will do that, we cut off the tips and let them produce a second crop, and meanwhile let a new cane come up and produce the crop in fall. So the fall bearing, this is why they're called ever bearing, right? Because you have an option to let them grow and produce two crops, one the first year on the tip and then a second crop the following summer on the branches. So you want to decide whether you want summer bearing or fall bearing. There's also there are choices in raspberries. You can choose, there are a number of different colors. There are red raspberries. These are red raspberries. They're heritage variety, lots of varieties. There are also yellow raspberries. The yellow and the red are the only kind that are fall bearing. The black and the purple raspberries are only come in the summer bearing variety. So that's kind of important to know. They have some subtleties around pruning, but I won't get into that because I don't know enough. But the other thing is that there are a lot of different varieties. They will fruit at slightly different times. and they will grow to different heights. So these are sort of an old variety, as I said, the heritage variety, and they grow tall. You might choose a variety that would, its primocane first fruiting would only be about here, would only grow about 4 or 5 feet. So it's important when you go to the nursery really to think about when you want to get your raspberries and what kind of pruning you want to do. Some people choose to get fall bearing and cut them off at the base every year and then have a summer bearing of a different variety.